Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this fireside chat about digital inclusion. As you can see, there's not a fire in sight, so apologies for anyone who, took the term fireside literally. My budget couldn't quite stretch to that, but if anyone's listening and has a great fireplace, let me know. The next one we do, we'll do it at your place. Just give me a shout. But in the meantime, got the central heating on, it's getting nice and toasty. So yeah, looking forward to this conversation, and hopefully it's the same for my guest, Yahye. In terms of intros and introductions, my name is Siji Onabanjo, and I am the Chief Growth Officer at Cyberduck. So we're a digital agency. We focus on combining user-centered digital experiences with robust technical implementations to create exceptional digital products and services. And I'm just kind of looking at the list of people who are joining now. Some people we've worked with in the past, some people who are currently still working with us. So hi to all those who are joining. But yeah, for those who know us, you'll know that we're passionate about creating experiences that are accessible for everyone. And, we've taken it upon ourselves to raise awareness within society, but also amongst digital professionals on the theme of inclusion. We've hosted a number of webinars and roundtables on this topic, which can be accessed from the Cyberduck website. So if you're interested in this topic and you want to find out more, please go there. But wait till after this session is done, because there's going to be some gems being dropped here too. So just check the settings. Can someone just confirm if there's captions showing or not? Cool. So there's captions. So that should also help. So yeah, this is our first LinkedIn Live. So what I'd say is if you have any questions or comments, feel free to type them. I'm still trying to get used to the platform myself, so hopefully I'll see them as we're talking. And we'll either save questions for the end, or we'll read them out in real time. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, in terms of my guest today and this conversation, I'm really excited to be joined by Yahye Siyad. So he's at Cyberduck. He's our diversity, inclusion, and accessibility lead. But as well as that, he wears many other hats. And in the time I've known him, I've been amazed by some of his experiences and his credentials. So I'm very confident he's going to drop a lot of gems today, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, look forward to hearing more from him. So Yahye, do you want to just introduce yourself a bit, give us a bit more of a background?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for all of us who joined us. Yeah, so I'd like to think of myself as somebody with a multicultural background and diverse background. I was born myself in Somalia as the third blind child to my family. At the age of 7, I had an amazing opportunity to, on a scholarship program, to go to Bahrain to study in a private school for blind people in Bahrain. I lived there for about 11 years. Unfortunately, as well as my amazing credential, school academic achievement I had over there, I endured obviously family separation because it wasn't safe for me to go back to Somalia when I was young, and I lived in the place for 11 years. And I moved to the UK at the age of 18, and I spent another 10 years there. So we endured overall 22 years of separation from my family. Then I moved to the Middle East, where I have a professional background in banking, media, social enterprise, and now obviously digital transformation with Cyberduck. As well as that, I established I'm founder of Inclusive Horizons, which is a social and inclusion advocacy platform. And obviously, I enjoyed myself along these years by traveling around the world extensively. I've been to over 52 countries, mostly alone, getting lost here and there. I'm also I also represented Great Britain squad in sports known as goalball. So you should check it out. But it's basically sports for people who are visually impaired. It's a ball, has a bell inside it, and it's really fun. So just check it out on YouTube. I had the pleasure of being for the Great Britain squad for about 5 years. I'm also the first certified scuba diver in the UAE as well. So I'd like to think I lived colorful life despite the obstacles I had due to my visual impairment.
Yes, amazing. So everything from being part of a GB squad for goalball, which I did check out, by the way, when you told me last time we spoke. I had a look on YouTube, and yeah, really interesting sport. To being, you mentioned like a scuba diving instructor, right? A blind certified instructor.
Yes.
Yeah, and so yeah, you've had quite a few different experiences there, and one of the things I'm interested in is, because you mentioned sort of growing up, you moved around quite a bit, different countries. So what was it like for you moving to the UK and adapting at the age of 18?
Well, I would say an eye opener in quotes, metaphorically and literally, I guess. What I really sort of learned, or how it's been for me in the UK, it wasn't the shock of moving abroad, because I've done that at the age of 7, but it was really embracing the gift of independence. As much as I had an excellent achievement, academic achievement in the Middle East, in Bahrain, where I grew up, in the UK, I really sort of took on myself to really, become independent in everything I do, from the chores at home, to mobility, to confidence in just taking care of myself, and just really building on that. And I think this is a key, component that today we'll touch on our subject, how really to be independent and able to do things for yourself. So everything from the house all the way to going to far different places.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to just kind of bring it back a little bit as to what we're here to talk about today, because the topic is digital inclusion, and clearly from your experiences firsthand, you would have experienced inclusion to various degrees. So I look forward to kind of digging more into that. But from your own perspective, then, what would you say? What is digital inclusion?
Very interesting. I would say that, look, there's a lot of things been talked about this and written about this, but we cannot first to start with, we cannot think of a digital inclusion as a different world to the real world inclusion, or to the physical inclusion. So basically, is the ability and the necessary activities for all different individuals to use the internet effectively, and to use all the offering that comes with the digital world effectively. So in that said, we need to clear a bit of misconception that a lot of people have, that digital inclusion is about accessibility that pertain to people with disability. No, it's not. I mean, it's one pillar of it, but it's an end goal that is essential for all of us. And in order to encompass that, we need to understand the different enablers. So from my experience, just as an advocate, I would say it has 5 different pillars that, if we think about it, it really affects all of us, digital inclusion. So those pillars that link to the digital inclusion are, in my opinion, one is to start with affordability. Is the person or the individuals or the household able to afford going online, from buying the necessary devices, into the connectivity, into being online, and having sort of easy way to be online. So it's to do with income, right? Is it applicable to the average income of that given country, or that given household, or individuals? That's to do with connectivity, right? And you'll be surprised, like, there's so many different places, even in a high income country like the UK, in rural places, the connectivity of internet is really not good. And so it doesn't matter how much I can afford it, but if the infrastructure here is not available, here we have issues. So here is where we need to call out on all these internet service providers, governments, NGOs, all the relevant stakeholders, to make sure that the connectivity of the internet is strong enough to be around. I mean, I was looking at a report by the Good Things Foundation, which is a digital agency, and it says, for example, in South Africa, which is like one of the 3 largest economy in Africa, only 10% of households have access to internet. 10% of the population. And even in the UK, obviously it's not as severe as that, but there are places that don't have connectivity. Third is to do with literacy. Did we equip the individuals to have the required literacy, literacy to be online? I'm not talking about being necessarily social media savvy or internet savvy, but at least just the basic skills to access materials online, to understand, to navigate, to make decisions on what they want to do online, from homeworking, homeschooling. Even for employees, is their role now become under threat because they don't have the necessary digital skills? So it's really essential that we understand that the literacy is a key component of either being included or excluded from the digital world. Fourth is to do with accessibility. And here, when we talk about accessibility, it's not just for the so-called registered people with disability, but is for anybody who is experiencing a temporary or situational, as well as permanent disability, right? We're talking about having, for example, a good, HTML, solid semantics HTML. It's not only good for accessibility, but also actually improves your search engine optimization, right? So it's about accessibility across the whole front, whether it's for the benefit of the organizations or for the benefit of potential users. Everything from a font, from captioning, from alternative text, from working with keyboard, working with different mouth sticks, etc., etc. Right. So this is quite key here. So it comes as a fourth element, in my opinion. The fifth element, which is the last one, is about the safety. So we all know that even before the pandemic, but now after the pandemic, had the incidence of frauds and scams had rocketed, right? So do people feel safe enough to protect themselves online from all this phishing and frauds and incidents happening, as well as do they feel safe from abuse online? We heard about so many high-profile individuals. Companies even boycotted some of the social medias because they felt that they did not protect them enough from abuse, etc. So really, it's across the whole spectrum from affordability, connectivity, literacy, accessibility, as well as safety. That affects everybody. And when we enable those things, we are digitally included, and we are not. We know that we have a sign of a digital exclusion.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point you raised there, because I think when it comes to digital inclusion, there has been a lot of talk about what's included in that, and I think accessibility as a pillar is one of the pillars that gets talked about the most. But of course, as you mentioned, there's the affordability side of it, there's connectivity, there's literacy, and there's also safety. And when you kind of went through those 5 different pillars, for me, that just kind of realized actually inclusion kind of affects all of us. And at any one point, one of those pillars could affect one of us in terms of how we go online and how we're able to engage with various websites and products. So I think it's important to just remember that inclusion encompasses all of that, essentially.
100%.
Yeah. And so how long have you been evangelizing for inclusion?
Well, if it's metaphorically, I would say 38 years since I've existed in this world, because really, like, inclusion is something that I experience every day, or exclusion. Every moment I'm at home, I'm outside, I'm here and there. I tend to look at things from an inclusion lens of point of view, but professionally, I would say for the last 12 years.
Yeah. So 38 years. We've obviously let the cat out of the bag in terms of your age, but professionally, sort of 12 years or so. So I'm keen to kind of find out from you, since you kind of started professionally, or actually, let's just say since you came to UK, what changes have you seen in sort of the general public's attitude towards inclusion?
Honestly speaking, I've seen a great shift. I think a lot of people now, I mean, it varies from place to place, really. But I would say at large, people become aware. People are not sort of surprised anymore that, you know, or want to exclude us from the mainstream. I think people are willing, but I think what is still prevalent is the assumption of how we are included and how we should be included. So I give you a classic example. I talk to people, and then I say, for example, okay, so I'm gonna get in touch with you, and that, and then they sometimes assume that, let me write it for you, and then somebody can read it for you, or let me do this so that somebody can do it. So they still think that I'm depending on people to do things, and when I show them how do I use my iPhone with the voiceover and all, you know, they're surprised. They're like, wow, you really can send email, you can text, you can, how do you do this? People are fascinated, you know. So they're fascinated from a place of curiosity, but not from a place of sort of patronizing, I would say. So I think what we need to now we work with the public is really show them, take their hands and show them how different people use different technology to become digitally included.
So does that annoy you, or did that annoy you, or do you not mind so much the fact that it's coming out of a place of curiosity? What's your kind of own personal viewpoint on that?
Not at all. Look, it really depends on what time of the day you catch me, but I would say for the most of the time, not really. I actually embrace it. I actually use it as an opportunity to create a dialogue, and I think it's perfectly fine not to have answers or to be. And actually, I encourage people to be as curious as they can get. Please, the more curious you are, the better, I think. And I think not being curious and making assumptions is where we're going to have a problem. But I think, generally speaking, I encourage that, really.
Okay. And okay, so talk about general public. What about, because we know there's a fair bit of legislation around inclusivity, which you tend to find when a law gets passed, people tend to take things a bit more seriously. So, I mean, do you think there's been a change in attitude of the legislators or the lawmakers in this regard?
Look, I think first and foremost, we have to acknowledge one thing, and that maybe a lot of people are not even aware of, which is all countries around the world have made some commitment towards inclusion. You ask me how? I would say we all heard about UNCRPD, which is the United Nations Convention Persons with People with Disability.
Yeah. And
I'm actually a certified trainer in that field. So it's a binding UN sort of treaty that all countries had signed and most of them had ratified, which basically has different articles pertaining to human rights of people with disability, and in particular, Article 9 and 21 has an emphasis on making infrastructures, including digital, as accessible as possible, right? So this, and also it's linked to this, the Sustainability Development Goal, which is again a United Nations Convention that most of countries strive to do. Now, on a local levels, there are has been different legislations that specifically are pertaining to the digital inclusion. Even in countries like India, Philippines. I was reading the other day. In the UK, we have the Accessibility 2008 Accessibility 2018 Act for the public sector. We have the 508 Section 508 in the States, and we have different versions across different countries. So we have, I think, made a big stride towards it. I think what is happening on the ground is that there's a bit of discrepancy of how to interpret those policies and legislations. And let me actually emphasize, there is a difference between policy and legislation. Policy is kind of the statement of intent, right? So organization can have, different government can have, and legislation is what makes it binding. So at the moment, there might be a lot of policies, but not enough legislations. And if there are some legislations, they are applicable mainly to the public sector, except for very few countries, such as, for example, Norway. The other day when I was looking at, it was very interesting that they have actually accessibility regulations pertaining to both public and private sector, right? So and there's a consequence, including naming and shaming different websites who do not comply. So if we need to create a compliance, we need to create policies first, and then actually I would say first, make people aware, increase awareness among public, among organizations, increase expertise, then bring the compliance on board by creating policies, statement of intent, and then by really bringing strong legislation that makes it binding. Because without this, nothing will happen. We talked about accessibility in the UK, I think, for 20 years, but really it's been taken seriously when the 2018 Act came into place, which is obviously linked, by the way, to the Disability Act as well, in the Disability Act 2010 in the UK.
Yeah, I think to that point you mentioned, because one of my colleagues at Cyberluck, I think it was Matt and Ramon, they did a webinar a couple of months ago, and one thing that came out of that was quite interesting. That within the UK, since I think it was around 2008, like there was this whole kind of big pledge or plea about digital inclusion, but like you said, it wasn't until 2018 accessibility regulation came in that a lot of public sector companies started actually taking it seriously. And I think to that extent, I think what I'm noticing is on the public, we do a lot of work in the public sector, and that's kind of ingrained and entrenched in the briefs that we have from those types of clients. But on the private companies, the private side, whilst I'm starting to see change, I think there's still a bit more of a gap between those who see inclusion as a must and those who kind of see it as a potential add-on. And I think it also varies, like you say, country to country. In the US, there tends to be there's more of a culture around people getting sued for not having non-accessible websites. But at least as far as I know, that's less of a case in the UK. So, absolutely. So are you saying that maybe there's more that could be done from the legal side? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Look, I would love to see every organization, every entity taking inclusion seriously, simply because it's the right thing to do, right? So, if we understand the consequence of exclusion, we all know that there was a big survey, a commission has been done in the UK 2008 about the importance of digital inclusion, and they realized that most of the people who are digitally excluded actually socially are also excluded. So it's linked to poverty, it's linked to serious consequences that is pertaining to human rights. So I would say, whether you're looking to increase your bottom line and you do accessibility for the business case, please go ahead. Whether you want to do it for the branding and to stop their brand damage, please go ahead. Whether you want to do it for the compliance because you're scared of being sued, please do it. We really don't. We're not fussed as a people with disability. We're not fussed why you do it, as long as you do it.
Yeah, fair enough. And so moving on to kind of businesses a bit more now. So, what do you think are the key ways that businesses can? What are the key ways businesses can make their digital products more inclusive and more accessible?
Great. I would say really is first and foremost to understand your audience, to understand in which industry you are, who you are serving, and when you're designing things, who you might be potentially excluding from that particular design. And accessibility is not about doing the one thing in one particular way. It's about alternatives. Like, for example, you walk into a store and you have a one side you have a revolving door, the other side you have like sort of automatic door, the other side you have like a normal door. So it doesn't matter which gate you get into the shop, as long as you get in. So
Yeah.
I would encourage organizations to understand who they're serving. Based on that, bring different accessibility and inclusion policies in place, because without statement of intent and policy, you are just sort of doing things as a checklist, right? So you're creating a commitment. We are serving these people, we are committed to this thing, and we are, we want to make sure that is as smooth as possible for everybody. Then you start to reach out, obviously after you've done the internal surveys and you built enough expertise and capacities, you reach out to different organizations, for example, who might have more experience than yourself. For example, here in CyberDeck, we have a lot of built-in expertise really in that. So make sure that your partner that you work with are also inclusive, because there's no point of you building all these things and your partners and your stakeholders are not. So I give you example of a wonderful experience I had I was buying a tablet the other day from a digital company, from a company who provide digital devices, and it was an amazing. The app was very accessible. I really enjoyed. Like I bought the tablets for my daughter within 3 minutes, and it was the next day in my house. Now, I had an email from them then the day after. They mentioned that it's from a research marketing company. They want to get my view on my experience, and I was just about to go there to say, wonderful, I really enjoyed it, right? Amazing, accessible experience, only to find out the researching marketing company, their website was not accessible. And it made me think that here is where you realize that if you do not build accessibility and inclusion built in, just like you build your project cycle from A to Z, then you're going to have gaps here and there. And it was a shame, really, because they've invested in amazing products that was accessible, but their stakeholders, including the research marketing company, was not accessible. So I would say look at it from A to Z and bake it into your project cycle.
And I think to that point, I think that's where sort of culture comes into it, isn't it? Because, I don't know who that company was, but they've obviously would have invested in making their service accessible and usable for all people, like including yourself. But yeah, if you've got a solid intent about being inclusive, I think that needs to kind of transcend not just your own product, but like you say, the supply chain to the people who work within the organization. It's something that has to kind of be across everyone within the company.
Absolutely, and continuously also like work with people with disability to test these things, because a lot of companies, they do a wonderful job from a checklist point of view, from being compliant to WCAG requirements, WCAG requirements, but then they have not tested or verified by different disability needs, or even just across different needs, really. So that's, I think, the user experience here is very, very important.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I saw a stat which says, I think they said it's something like 94% of sort of top grossing e-commerce sites in the world didn't have basic accessibility requirements, as an example. And then on the other hand, you see some companies who are really trying to take on board what you just said. So, I mean, I don't use TikTok myself, so this is just what I've heard through a grapevine. But they now offer sort of editable auto captions as a standard feature, and that's after engaging with the deaf community and getting that feedback. So that's now something that they've improved and included in their product. So
Absolutely.
it's those kind of things we're talking about. And I'd say so obviously Cyberduck, when I kind of think about what we could do to reduce digital exclusion, just kind of going back to the pillars you mentioned. So you talk about kind of the skills. One of the things that we do is we provide workshops with a local community. So we tend to have kids coding clubs. We have partnerships with local schools where we go in and we try and teach those schools and educate people within the community. One of our clients, actually Sanctuary, as part of working with us, they asked like how we add that extra social value, and that was an important thing for them as well in working with an agency. So that's some things we do. There's also the Brixton Finishing School, run by Ali Owen. So I think that's more for the advertising industry, but I know they do a lot of work in communities, engaging with people who might be from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and actually pairing them with companies or agencies in our space and kind of help them get that step up. So there's a lot of people doing some great work there.
Absolutely. And this is where I think the wonderful example of what you mentioned is it's a collaborative effort, right? I mean, as Cyberduck, we collaborated with different agencies. So it's really a cross responsibility from government, NGOs, private companies. I think also the big sort of multinational companies have, such as Google, Facebook, Amazon, they have a really big role, Apple, they have a big role really to play, because while we could be waiting for legislations, but when we see a big commitment from the big players, including Cyberduck with the digital transformation, I think we can get things moving. And also when we connect those kind of different pillars to each other, we understand that they are actually intertwined. We start to take inclusion a bit more seriously. And I give example. Let's have example of somebody with a limited connectivity. That person might benefit from accessibility need. How is that possible? The alternative text for the images that are designed for people like myself who are visually impaired.
Yeah.
That person with limited internet connection, if they cannot upload the pictures, they will see the alternative text in the image, and they will know that this is an image of A, B, C, and D. So connectivity, accessibility, literacy, affordability, safety, all these things, elements are really, even though they're different, they are very much connected to each other.
Yeah, so I was just taking a swig of water as you were speaking, Ben. But no, it's a really good point. And I think you touched upon this. I'll expand. So I think when you build an accessibility from the start of a project, and it's not just a tick box exercise, as you mentioned, or an afterthought, that's when I think you really create products that are inclusive from the outset, right? So, one of the things that we do is we embed inclusion in right from the beginning, and we'll even create goals or KPIs around our projects that look at things like inclusivity. To give an example, we did a project with FastStream. So that's a cabinet office's program that identifies future graduate leaders. And traditionally, the method of assessing candidates was through paper-based exercises at assessment centers. So we were tasked with using digital technology to, try and make the process more streamlined whilst being more inclusive as well. Now, as with all projects, we start by trying to get an understanding of the users, their needs, and how they'll actually be impacted by the project. And one of the things we identified during those initial interviews, which, by the way, is why you talking about speaking, you mentioned about speaking to the users directly. What we identified during those initial interviews was that there was a notably different perception to the whole assessment process from candidates, from different socioeconomic backgrounds, from candidates of different races, and even those with disabilities. I know our researchers mentioned that certain people said they didn't feel like they fit in, or this process wasn't for people like them, and this made them feel sort of more uncomfortable or anxious before and during sitting the assessments. So, and as you can imagine, you're going to an assessment center. If you're feeling anxious, you're feeling uncomfortable, there tends to be a correlation with those who do well and those who don't.
Absolutely.
It's something that our client was looking to actively change. So what we did is, when we looked to digitize this whole process, a key factor was how can we make it inclusive for all candidates from the outset. So how did this look? Well, we did persona research, we created personas, and then from that, we were able to sketch out user journeys and service maps for the entire kind of assessment experience. This is from the moment they enter the building all the way through to the assessment day itself and at the end. And within that process, we kind of pinpointed all the areas that could benefit from better inclusivity, and we came up with recommendations for improving them. So a few examples of things that we did to actually make changes there. One was actually just a format of the day and the candidate experience. So when people arrived, or when candidates arrived at the centre, instead of waiting in a sterile room before a appointed time, we changed it so that they were able to mingle and connect with the other participants who are going to be there. And this was important because some of the activities were group-based. So being able to engage with people beforehand was just is a small thing that you could do, or that we did, to just kind of change the atmosphere and change that vibe. And then we actually spent a lot of time as well just looking at the onboarding of the digital app. So we made sure that the tutorial, which kind of talked candidates through all the activities of the day, we spent a lot of time looking at that tutorial, make sure that candidates felt comfortable with everything that was going to be happening, because of course we're moving us away from the paper-based assessments through to using technology and using the iPad and tools like that.
Absolutely.
And then our content designers as well. So they work to ensure the tone of voice and language used within the app was reaffirming and self-assured, and like made people feel more self-assured. We consciously chose imagery that was inclusive. So, like I said, we wanted to target all users. So we made sure the imagery within the app as well showed the diversity of the talent within the kind of fast stream program as well. And then our front end and UI team, so they ensured that all the various accessibility needs could be met throughout through the interface design, and this included things like using accessible typography. And then importantly, as you've mentioned and I mentioned, like when it comes to testing, it's actually testing this with users to actually get their feedback and be able to improve a product as a result. So we ran simulated assessment days with over 20 candidates for both the alpha and beta versions of the tool. And during those sessions, we conduct ethnographic research too, just to kind of assess how everything was working. And taking this kind of approach where you're actually looking at inclusivity as a whole from the start of the project, not just at the end going, let's run a quick tool to see if it's accessible or not. But if you actually bake it into a process, you do get great results. I think from memory, the results we got for this were like 94-95% of users found the app experience enjoyable. 85% said that the tutorial at the start was very helpful for them. And I think sort of most importantly, and something that we were really proud of, was that 20%, I think it's like 27%, there was a 27% increase in the success rate from candidates of those groups I mentioned at the start. But they also had their highest intake of candidates, users who are declared as disabled, which was 15%, which is the highest that they'd ever had. So it does show the importance of trying to break inclusive design and inclusivity into your product from the outset. So I think that's something that other kind of digital products and apps could probably take on board as well, right?
Absolutely, right. And what really shows what you're saying here is kind of the holistic approach, right? So it wasn't just like making sure that, I'm just following the HTML code, I'm doing that, like sometimes people think of accessibility as like a boring thing and they it's like a checklist. But what you're saying here really is that what we do at CyberDuck is kind of end-to-end kind of inclusive mind about the people that we're serving, what needs they have, what skills they require, and there was always going to be a gap somewhere here and there, and we never expect organizations to get to perfection. But what we're really saying is that we want the mindset to be clear about different steps, just like how you do your projects, right? You do it meticulously well. You look at different scenarios, you look at different sort of requirements, and you work around it. So accessibility has to be based on that. And this is, I really urge also organizations, before I get into this point, I'll quickly just share this, since we are now also on LinkedIn, and bit of a hint for people looking for jobs. I was looking the other day for this from stats about the fastest growing jobs, and these two jobs are growing really fast. One set of jobs that require digital skills, which is obviously we're not surprised, and the other one is the diversity and inclusion, especially in North Africa, in North America and Europe. And this really tells us something. Tells us that we are going digital very fast, but also we start to take inclusion very seriously. So on that point, I want to ensure that that accessibility is one of the best things that he can measure as a diversity and inclusion specialist, right? And if you do not sort of embed accessibility within the role of diversity and inclusion, or at least it should be across all the different functions, but at least to take a lead on that, then you're missing out. You're missing out, and you're going to end up with a lot of loose ends here and there. But accessibility is one of the easiest things that you can measure as diversity and inclusion specialist. So I would recommend every organization, obviously, to have a D&I function first. If not, then at least to have accessibility embedded within the roles, in order to create that culture we spoke about.
Sure. And actually, just kind of looking through some of the questions, there's been a few questions. So one of them, I think, kind of ties to what you just mentioned. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts, Yahye. So what are some of the kind of major or common mistakes that educational institutions make when they try to tackle inclusivity, digital or otherwise? I mean, one thing you mentioned is not really taking the accessibility into account. Is there anything else that you can think of?
I would say sort of using kind of prescribed solutions that had worked in the past. The technology and digital world is ever evolving thing, and therefore the need of people also evolving. So what is really important is to understand who you're working with, and to understand that the information that you have is actually relevant and updated to the people that you're serving. So education institutions, I think we tend to be behind, and this just from my own experience I've seen in terms of the fast digital solutions. So for example, I give example. For example, most of the major sort of platforms that for streaming and for collaborations have a lot of functionalities that we don't need to do. We don't need to add things on top of it. So we need to understand what exists there, and what do we really need to work on top of that.
Okay, that's a good response. So I have a question, because I know this has been seen as quite controversial. But
controversy.
You have controversy. Okay, maybe we've had controversial, but overlays. So overlays is something that websites use. Like we talk about people who include accessibility in their sites. So overlays are considered quite controversial when it comes to making sites more accessible for those who have visual impairments. You yourself having a vision impairment, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the use of overlays.
Look, I think everything has a place and some utility of some sorts. My problem with overlay is when companies are to rely on it from A to Z, right? It has its own downfall, but it can be useful as just one elements of building sort of accessible solutions. But I would say the problem is when you let overlay take over, then this is where your problem. And also, you start to downgrade what accessibility means. You start to think as a quick fix, right? We spoke about making it embedded into your cycle. So I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I think it might have relevancy in limited capacity.
Okay. Yeah, because I think from what I've heard, they only detect a fraction of the potential accessibility issues that a site could have.
Yeah,
And
about 20-30%, no more than that.
Just 25%, okay. Which means like there's 70% then that, you know, remains undetected. So it's not the solution, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's like I give you example of what you try to do with overlay. It's like you are a translator, and you just say, oh, I'm just gonna place everything on Google Translator, and I'm gonna hope that it's gonna be a correct document. You can't, right? It gives you something to build on, but you should never rely on it.
Yeah, yeah, so that's a good way to look at it, actually. Yeah, it's a very good way to look at it. So based on that, then, so as someone who's got who's blind, who has a visual disability, can you just walk me through like some of the considerations of things that need to be in place for you to be able to use technology?
Yeah, so I think especially post-pandemic, we start to realize how important the digital world for us really. I use a screen reader, so it reads out for me what's on the screen and etc. So I tend to face different type of challenges where I still sort of old-fashioned of receiving things on paper and going to websites that just still not accessible. So it's either inaccessible solutions or either old-fashioned solution that I cannot access.
And what do you think there's any kind of, so you talked about sort of that, so do you see there being any I mean, how do you think things could improve then, is I guess what I'm trying to ask.
I think we need to continue the fast of digital solutions, but we also need to make sure that the lens of accessibility and inclusion also runs in tandem with it. So if I could think of a metaphor here, I would think of like a bicycle. You have two wheels, right? So let's imagine the front wheel is the digital acceleration, and the back wheel is the inclusion. So you cannot rely on the front wheel to take you forward. You need to have an inclusive mindset to make sure that this digital acceleration has a meaning or has a purpose. So I, for example, face a problem that at home, whenever I'm receiving letters, I'm still receiving, obviously, just like most people, receiving letters by post, and it really kind of winds me up in a way, because I'm thinking it's 2022. Why are we still getting letters, old-fashioned way? And why cannot, for example, we have digital solutions, to replace that? And if we think of digital lens across, we're gonna come up. It's gonna be an amazing basis for innovation. In my opinion, it's in digital solutions give us unlimited possibilities of innovation.
So talking about the letters, so that's, and to be honest, that is a situation that I can't relate to, but you're saying you get letters and obviously struggle to be able to read them yourself.
Yeah. So I get the letters. I cannot read them. I have to rely on somebody else to read them, which obviously breaks my privacy. Not to mention that is damaging the environment and etc. So I was thinking about this the other day. Actually, I was scratching my head literally like this. I was like, what can I do apart from complaining about it? So I thought, no, why can this not be an opportunity for digital acceleration? I thought of like, what if they build, for example, a kiosk in each property that is linked to the postcode of this household, and instead of receiving a physical letters, you receive a digital letter in that kiosk. You go there, you access it securely with your username, password, face ID, finger ID, whatever you use, and you access those things, and you're able to see letters in a digital format, and even maybe correspond with those organizations or utility providers or government or whatever the letter that come from. So that could really be an amazing way to modernize the post. It will save the environment a heck of a lot of trees being cut every year, and it will make things very accessible. And of course, I'm talking about that kiosk being accessible. Just for example, Alexa or all these other interactive of digital solutions or technology.
You know what? You might have just given our innovation team an idea there to try and build something like that. So instead of you receiving like a physical letter will kind of come to you in a digital format through this kiosk you're saying, which would be kind of placed in your house, which will give you then the control to be able to access your mail and read it and respond to it without obviously having someone else read those letters for you.
Absolutely, or it can be even linked into your app. It can be interactive things on the cloud. The possibilities are really endless. But I hope, Siji, if this idea works, that I get my share of public rights, right?
Have a chat now. Let's talk privately online and see how we can build this. But actually, looking at the time, so I think we said we were going to go for 45 minutes. We've really gone for 50. So it's clearly been a enjoyable conversation. I've got a couple more questions for you, if that's okay. Sure. The first is, what impact do you think the pandemic has had on inclusion? And my question after that will be, what do you feel is the future of inclusion? Which I think you kind of touched upon just now. So let's start with the pandemic question.
I think pandemic obviously has been very sad experience for a lot of us, people that we lost, for the lockdowns and economic damage and stuff. But if there's one thing that also it really highlighted the digital divide. In the UK alone, there was about 9% of the household with children had no devices whatsoever at the beginning of the pandemic. Imagine, this is in the UK. You could imagine the rest of the world, with other countries, with low income countries, what the situation is. A lot of people, elderly, senior citizens, with different socioeconomic background, really sort of lost their jobs, and the jobs become under threat because they couldn't do what they do because the whole world just went digital. So it really highlighted, and I think even the wealth of the wealthiest had increased significantly, and this is because of, in my opinion, is because of the digital divide. So we really need to understand that the pandemic had made this really obvious and blatant and explicit, and I think we've seen some initiatives from the government, even in here. I think it's called Digital Skills Bootcamp, that sort of start to tackle this issue, and I think we need to make sure this is becoming the reality. Digital access to the internet, it should, in my opinion, should be a basic utility bill, just like how we have access to water and electricity. So it really exposed that sad reality, and if we don't, then we're gonna have a big part of the society, burden on everybody else, and we don't want that. Where is digital inclusion is going? I think hopefully to a good places. I think hopefully everything from metaverse, from different realities, that is augmented reality, all things that is coming now. I think one thing that we could say with certainty is that we learned that we cannot have accessibility or inclusion as a last minute thought or something that we do as an add-on. We have to do it really from beginning and understand that the solutions for accessibility, it benefits practically everybody else, either in a temporary or situational or otherwise. So I think the future is hopefully bright, but if we don't make the same mistakes and same assumptions that we made in the last 30 years.
Yeah, okay, and I think that's a good kind of way to sort of wrap up. What I'll say is, because I've been trying to follow the chat as well. So Chandeep, Ramon, Joanne, Ben, thanks for your questions. What I'll do is, once we finish this, I will respond to each of you individually just to answer your questions, and we can kind of follow up from there. But yeah, I just want to thank you for your time this afternoon. it's been really insightful to kind of hear your views, and I kind of I've loved actually hearing about your own experiences, and it just adds an extra layer onto sort of my own knowledge on the topic. So thanks for that. In terms of rounding up, I think some of the key points you mentioned were that whilst accessibility is a big part of digital inclusion, it's not the only pillar. There's other pillars too. So we also need to consider issues of affordability, connectivity, literacy, and safety as well. I think given the increasing dependence on health, work, and education on digital world, we need to make sure that internet access is available for everyone. Digital exclusion, you mentioned, strongly correlates with social exclusion and can actually increase those divides. And that, yeah, everyone has a key part to play, from businesses through to government, legislators, and the general public too. And actually deprioritizing or not prioritizing inclusion is likely to severely impact kind of not like your business moving forward, because it's an important thing that needs to be in place. So with all that being said, just to kind of, if I was to summarize and sum up, I'd say, actually, these aren't my words because I saw one of my colleagues wrote this, but you might not be 100% inclusive from the word go, but you can be 100% intentional and doing the right thing. Correct. And I think the truth is, many people don't know where to start with that. So one of the things I'd advise within my role is to start with an accessibility audit. Have a company come in, like a CyberDuck, look at your organization, look at your products, look at your services, and highlight the gaps and where there's improvement that can be made in terms of inclusiveness. So similar to what we did with VastStream in the example I gave earlier, and with other clients too. So hopefully it's been a really interesting chat for those who have listened in. Thanks for your time. I welcome any feedback. We welcome any feedback. If you want to find out a bit more about accessibility audits or anything around this subject, please drop me a message on LinkedIn or to my email address. It is siji@cyber-duck.co.uk. And yeah, happy to have a conversation with you or loop you in with one of our inclusive experts. So again, thanks, Yahye, for joining me.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for
thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks for all of you. Take care. Bye.